latest webinar. As most of you will know, my name's Elliot Roebuck and I am a director and co-founder at Elevate Greater Manchester. One of the things that we're really passionate about is making sure that we support individuals, businesses and the success of the region itself. And it will come as no surprise to many of you that financial well-being sits at the heart of all three of those strands. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Elliot Roebuck, who's going to talk us through some of the issues around financial well-being that they're seeing as individuals, as employees, as employers, and people who are potentially looking at setting up their own businesses. So before we get started into the main kind of, meat of the topic, could you give us a little bit of background as to what it is that you do, Elliot?
Hi, Elena. Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. So we work in financial planning in Manchester, and really, the way that we connected ourselves was to really sort of elevate Manchester and the community as a whole. So we offer holistic financial planning advice to business owners mainly within the Manchester area. So it's about making sure that people are making the best possible decisions that they can now, but also for the future. And through that, obviously, we've been in quite a major year, some very difficult times for many. So we've been supporting a lot of employees through financial wellbeing through that process to increase engagement and retention, along those lines as well.
And I know when we've spoken over the last kind of couple of months, you're definitely in that camp of businesses that have been busier than ever because of what's going on, because at kind of whatever level you are in that, whether it's someone who's fearful of their job or someone who's running a multi-million-pound company, there is a huge level of uncertainty. So if we could start then by perhaps the thing that we're seeing kind of quite a lot of at the moment, that is employees having concerns over either their own job security, or even if their job's secure, potentially partners' jobs are at risk, financial situations are changing. What kind of issues are you seeing being raised by employees?
So, in a lot of cases, we're finding that as an employee, they don't tend to go to their boss, to ask for financial support. If you can imagine, if you paid my salary, if I know, you know exactly what you're paying me, I have this sort of guilt that, I have to be responsible with that money, that you're paying me. So there's big concerns if you are struggling with money that nobody's really wanting to go to their boss to talk to them. So you're more likely to talk about having an illness, or those sorts of areas. But as soon as it comes to money, people sort of seem to shy away and not want to talk about those areas. What we're finding is that through having conversations, a lot of people have bad habits, in terms of their spending. And if you think about the past year, everybody's habits have had to change, because of their lifestyles changing. So it's important to, instill good habits and think about what you're doing with your money to make sure that you're protecting yourselves, for now and in the future. An area that we discussed, we've discussed quite a lot in the past is just financial anxiety right now. So 95% of GP appointments currently are all because of work-related stress of some sort. So that's work-related stress that's generated mainly from financial concerns. And as we know, over the last year, it's been a very challenging year for many if that uncertainty is cropping up in terms of their role. So as soon as that happens, their finances become, more of a challenge, really. So we've been trying to reduce that stress, reduce that anxiety, create people on more sort of ground level and support them in thinking sort of backwards, reducing bad habits, and then planning, for the future as well. So it's a massive area. Right.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about those, those good and bad habits, it's just that reminder that actually something that's potentially missing from our education system, even at that basic level, is around budgeting, about saving, and obviously being able to save and having that additional money is a real privilege that isn't available to a lot of people. But equally, there are people who have got a good disposable income, but have potentially got not got the knowledge that they perhaps should have around debts, credit cards, loans, saving schemes. There's kind of all of this kind of stuff out there, and it's sometimes a little tricky to navigate. And then, as you say, once we get into this this difficult situation, that's when we really start to notice, you know, have I got good habits that are paying off because I'm a bit more protected, or actually has that lack of knowledge put me in quite a difficult position? And really interesting what you're saying about that link between kind of financial health and mental well-being, because, you know, we are obviously seeing some, you know, fairly traumatic stories coming through. So if you are an employer, then what can you do to try and make that an easier conversation to broach with your employees?
Yeah, so I think, you know, one of the major things to think about is that, you know, think sort of more long term. And, you know, if you are an employer and you're not supporting your members of staff at the moment, you know, employee engagement and retention was really difficult before the pandemic. But, you know, think about the really good talent that's out there. If they're not necessarily being looked after right now through their bosses and with their companies, then in the future they might look to jump ship, you know, sort of further down the line. So, you know, one area to consider is supporting them from that financial perspective, but really bring an expert in from the outside, because somebody is probably more likely to open up to an outside individual and professional rather than sort of your boss and talk about your finances, really. So one thing that we've been doing is offering sort of one-to-one financial wellbeing sessions. So really talking to people, how do they use their money? You know, how did they use money in the past? You know, how do they remember money from childhood? Things like that, to really sort of trigger how they sort of spend their capital now. And really then through that one-to-one, just generating good habits and formulating a plan. So, you know, some of the best people that we work with, they have a 5 or 10 year financial plan, you know, moving forward. They know exactly where they want to be in the future. So for an employee to create a plan like that and be thinking about the future is so important, you know, to make sure that you're going to hit those goals moving forward. So really help them reduce that anxiety on a small one-to-one session, and make sure that they're thinking about the way that they're spending their money, sort of moving forward, really.
I think that's really important, that idea of having an objective third party, because it's so weird that in so many ways we've become a really open society. We talk about all kinds of things that, you know, perhaps our parents' generation, definitely our grandparents' generation, didn't talk about. It wasn't in the open, but actually talking about money, even within couples, within families, within close friendship groups, that we perhaps don't talk about what we earn, we don't talk about you know, what level of debt we've got, we don't talk about what we've got in terms of savings, and it's almost kind of seen as it's just not the done thing, not the British thing to kind of talk about, where actually that having those conversations is the first part to kind of putting together that plan. And, you know, maybe you know, now is the time to start thinking, okay, well, this is where I am. What is it that I need to make sure that I'm a little bit more protected? And exactly that, you know, employers that offer that additional service and support are going to come out of this much stronger position than those that haven't offered that level of concern. And obviously employers need to offer some form of pension scheme. Do you find that that's something that they are having real conversations with employees on, or do you think that's very much just we tick the box, you've got a pension? You know, is that potentially a way into dealing with it?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of employers that we're talking to, they don't provide sort of much information in regards to maybe their full benefits that they have, you know, as an employee, but also workplace pensions. You know, so many conversations that we have, people don't even know what their workplace pension means. You know, they don't understand the benefits, and they don't really understand why they should take advantage, you know, of a workplace pension. So that's something, you know, really to focus on as an employer. You know, if you have a really good benefits package, for example, you're not only sort of retaining the good stuff that you have, but you can then also attract the best possible talent, you know, to your business moving forward. So another area is, you know, is seminars that we've been hosting on pensions. It sort of really informing employees what they mean, the benefits, and why they should take advantage, you know, of those. But I'm sure, you know, yourself, that people that you talk to, they don't know what it is, what it means, where it is. You know, they it's in a lot of people's lives, it's not necessarily a priority, but retirement does crop up very quickly. So ensuring that you're doing the right thing with that money, is really, really key.
It's having that long-term view, isn't it, that you've mentioned, that I think we're so focused and quite rightly focused sometimes on exactly what's kind of in the here and now and what we need, where actually making a very small change early can have a massive benefit, where if we leave it too late, we've suddenly got to make some fairly chunky decisions later on. I always get fairly depressed now when I see these articles about if you start saving at 20, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's what I should be doing at 20. But there's obviously all kinds of other things going on. So I think, just opening up that conversation and like you say, some of those benefits, it's maybe not as tangible as your extra day's holiday, but the impact that has on your long-term well-being can be huge. If we've got so we know, sadly, there have been many redundancies this year. Myself and Katie, my co-founder of Elevate, we're in that pool. So it's very much, it's been something that we faced and have done what many other people have done, which is to take that opportunity to say, actually, we can try and make something work for ourselves. And we were hugely fortunate that within our network, we had some great advisors. I know that, financial management, planning, Excel spreadsheets, that is not my strength. So getting an accountant in pretty much from day one was there to make sure that was all kind of set up in the right way. If you're speaking to people who are looking at either making that leap from employment into self-employment, or who have been made redundant and deciding to go down kind of the freelancer route or kind of self-employment, what are the kind of key things that they should be thinking about at this stage?
Yeah, super. And I think, when you think about setting up, I think a lot of people have been forced, in the last year to actually go solo and make that jump, really. And I don't know about yourselves, but maybe it's sped up the process to go solo.
Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't, for us, it was, we weren't sitting there thinking, let's set up and get planning. It was literally a ridiculous story, actually, which I think I might have shared before. It was me sending a gift to Katie of a dog at a laptop with the world burning around, and the caption was me job hunting in a pandemic. And whilst, looking back, it's kind of, it's a funny story and it's worked out. The reality is that, that is the case, that, that if you have been made redundant, there aren't necessarily jobs around in your area. So even if self-employment wasn't something that had ever crossed your mind before, you suddenly find yourself that is possibly the best or only option.
Yes, yeah, completely. And just to give you sort of an example, we got approached by a lady 6 months ago, and she was actually introduced to us through a current client. So she'd worked 30 years in the industry, built incredible experience, worked for multinational businesses, really, really great track record, but she was made redundant, unfortunately, across the past year. And, when we got introduced to her, she was, really extremely stressed, didn't know sort of where to turn, didn't know what plans to put in place. She was actually looking to take on a member of staff from day one. But from that, she didn't know sort of her obligations, and things like that. So really, really important, if somebody is beginning to set up or has recently set up with the business, it's important to make sure that you've got the right things in place to mitigate risk, further down the line. And this is one of the biggest areas that we talk to people about. You don't want to end up with a massive tax bill, down the line because you haven't set up correctly, and you haven't done the right things correctly in the first place. So really important to, slow the process down and make sure that you're setting up that company correctly, really. With this particular lady that we helped, Ilona, she was really mainly concerned about benefits that she was leaving behind, in the company. So, certain things to consider is leaving behind sick pay, holiday pay. This lady had private medical insurance, through the business, and all of a sudden that was just all wiped clean, and she couldn't take advantage of any of those areas. So something to consider if you are a business owner is you can create benefits packages and put packages together that you pay for through the business as well. So over the long term, that could potentially reduce some taxation as well. So there's like a number of benefits to sort of look at that. But
yeah, and it's that whole picture, isn't it? And you get people that are absolutely fantastic at what they do, but that doesn't mean that you're suddenly an employment lawyer. It doesn't mean you're suddenly an accountant. It doesn't mean you're suddenly a financial planner. All of these things. And I think sometimes when you feel like you're going it alone, you feel like you have to actually go it alone. What you need is just to have that network of advisors, because like you say, in the short term, you're focused on what can I do that's going to bring the money in, and you're perhaps not thinking, well, what happens if this goes wrong? How do I set this up? And you can just see that, you know, in some of these stories that have been driven by the need to kind of generate income as quickly as possible, that those processes just aren't there, that as soon as things start to get a bit difficult, or just that length of time, you know, if you're not putting tax separately, if you're not putting employment contracts in place, that's going to be quite tricky further down the line. Are there any kind of things that you could kind of point people to in terms of, you know, overall guidance as to, you know, if you are looking at making that choice, is there any kind of, you know, basic government advice that's useful for people to look through?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of sort of more localised, you know, grants, for example, that the government's providing. There's an entrepreneurs programme as well that the government is providing in terms of support. So there are a number of ways to sort of raise, you know, finance and get that support. So I know we both know, you know, the Growth Hub, for example, and, you know, amazing organisations like that within Manchester. I think the most important thing is really to sit down and make that plan, you know, think about what that journey looks like, you know, think about when you want to be taking on members of staff, you know, how you're going to bring revenue in, look at your budgeting, you know, look at reducing costs as early and as quickly as possible, you know, as well, and think about those different areas really. But the best thing that we normally say to people is, you know, talk to people, you know, reach out, make good connections, you know, with good advisors across a number of different areas, and then lean on them, you know, for that support. And just a little example of my dad. So my dad ran a business for 33 years, and one of the major reasons why I got into this world was because he never sought advice, you know, in that 33-year period. And if he would have done, you know, he would have been in such a better position, you know, now than he was. And we actually sold the business in the end, and I supported him through that. And if anybody's considering selling, it's potentially one of the most stressful things you could ever go through. And it was so difficult, but we really wish that we would have sought advice and lent on advisors, you know, for that support. And, you know, making those connections early on is super important. Really. So
absolutely singing our tune there. Like Katie and I are such advocates of networking in general. You know, Greater Manchester's an incredible place to have those, and yeah, we've had the benefit of so much formal and informal advice as to what we're doing. But one of the things, I think, because we've been in that world for so long, that we've seen over and over again those stories that you mentioned about kind of what happens if you don't do that, but also these incredibly inspiring stories of people who have worked together, who've collaborated, who've gone out. And I think pretty much every business leader that I've spoken to, when you say, you know, what is the one thing that you do differently, it's get advice from day one. You know, show your business plan to somebody, talk it through. You know, your family are going to tell you that everything's amazing, and like, you know, go for it. And you need those, you know, those cheerleaders who are just like, they're behind you 100%, whatever. But you do then need that real critical eye to be like, well, that's great, but have you thought about cash flow? Like, it's great that in a year you might balance out, but is there actually cash in your account every time? How long can you go without taking a salary? How's this going to look? And having someone who's able to challenge you on those things is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you'll probably completely agree. It's that sort of like accountability as well. You know, so our clients become accountable to us, and because of that, you know, they're more conscious of their decisions that they're making. You know, they know that when we sit down every 6 months or a year, you know, we're having that review and we're having that constant discussion. So if you're not accountable to something, or if you don't have that plan, then you can't, possibly implement that, as quickly and as efficiently, really, as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's like going to the gym in some ways, isn't it? I was members of gyms for years where I'd rock up and do whatever I was supposed to be doing, and never particularly enjoyed it or got anything out of it. And then from starting a new gym where you've got a plan, having a PT, that you're suddenly like, I've got to tell my PT like what I did this week. I've got to have a weigh-in at a certain time. I've got to go and lift whatever it was that I've been aiming to do. That having those targets and that accountability, it's been a complete game changer. And your financial health is kind of similar, I suppose, that if you've said this is what we're going to have in the bank by then, these are the processes we're going to have, knowing that somebody's checking up on that. If you're not someone who's a natural planner, not someone who enjoys doing that side of things necessarily, it's a target and a reason to do them.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And some of the, just as little examples, really, like one of the things that people never think about is when they're making that transition, in terms of say their income, they don't think about how they could potentially protect their earnings as well, when they move forward through that business. So the stats are absolutely shocking, but in the UK, the majority of people don't actually protect their own income. So, prime example, we all insure cars, phones, we even insure pets, but new businesses and startups and SMEs, the people that work there, they tend not to even protect their own income, so things to consider, if you're setting up is make sure that if you couldn't work for a long period of time, protect yourself, make sure that you have that level of protection, so not only just to reduce your stress levels, but it's that planning again and making sure that you've got a process in place, should anything go wrong. And it's always, really important to think about.
And it's, it's a typical thing of insurance, isn't it? It's really boring until you need it, and it's suddenly the most important thing that you're saying, like, why didn't I have that? Why didn't I cover myself for this? And, we've chatted about it a lot this year in terms of, travel insurance, as to, people are suddenly in this position that we never thought we'd be in, where, borders were closing, flights changing, holidays being cancelled, just everything that could possibly go wrong with travel has. That actually the detail of your travel insurance and whether that's in place or not has become, phenomenally important. And I think it's fair that people don't necessarily know the range of things that you can insure against, having that balance of, should I insure? Am I better saving against, you mentioned pet insurance. I insured my pet after it cost me hundreds of pounds to sort out a tail injury. And it's like, this would have been a good idea to think about a lot earlier. And it is only when it comes to the forefront of your mind that you start making those decisions. And you can see that, the big players, they insist on it. So, you have to have your buildings insurance, you have to have your car insurance. Everyone pays in that little amount so that, everything's covered. And just understanding those ranges of insurances that there might not be something that's on your mind as a concern, but you can guarantee as soon as it happens, that could literally be the end of the business.
Yes, and it's that's that goes back to sort of structuring the business as well. It's important to think about how it's structured. Obviously to take that advice, to make sure that you're doing it in the most effective way. So many people, will be rushing to set up. They might, become a sole trader, but really they should be limited. So there could be lots of different, parameters there, really. And I know it's exciting. It's great, isn't it? Opening something new and going solo, but it's once again, it's going back to that journey. But
it is. It's understanding those protections. So I used to work as a commercial litigation solicitor, so I had kind of some understanding, not only of the bones of corporate law, but also the kind of what happens when it all goes wrong side. So it's something I've just taken for granted that's kind of been part of the journey. But it is something that if you speak to people and they say they're setting up on their own, that you might choose one structure over another, not as a choice, just because you think that's what you need to do, that I need to be limited, or I need to be a sole trader, or I'm working with a friend and it'll all be fine and there's nothing in writing. And it's that's probably the case, but you kind of need to be protected in case it's not. So it's just normalizing, I think, having some of those conversations. So in this kind of we're coming towards hopefully well, we are coming towards the end of the year, hopefully the end of the more difficult period. You know, the signs are that, you know, 2021, we've hopefully got vaccines coming in, we've got investment in things like, you know, the green economy to try and help kind of generate a bit more activity, and the market's picking up. What kind of advice would you give to people then, that if hopefully we're going into more secure employment next year, we're potentially getting into a stage where, you know, we've had this opportunity to reset behaviours, what are your kind of, you know, top tips on generating some good habits as we go into the new year?
Yeah, of course. So I think, you know, if you're, you know, you're in a position where you're earning a salary, and you know you've got a good level of income, and you know you're wanting to change those habits, you know, definitely what we always talk to clients about is, you know, you should really look at savings as if it's like a cost, you know, as if it's a bill. So you should always save first, you know, and then whatever you have left then becomes, you know, sort of your money to sort of play with, really. So always, you know, look at that as that savings is a cost, you know. As we move into, hopefully, as you say, you know, things are settling down, and we're generating more positivity and you know, good things within the markets. It's just important to make sure that you're thinking about the future. You know, as an emergency fund, for example, I know that's really dull to think about, but you know, a lot of people wouldn't have said that they would have needed, you know, substantial amounts of money, you know, on the side to cover their bills, you know, before this year happened. So it's really important to make sure that you've got a good emergency fund there, you know, should anything happen or go wrong, then you can sort of cover those bills as well. But we always find, you know, 2021, January, it'll be, you know, new year, new me, you know, everybody gets into that sort of swing of things. And it's important to make sure that you're reviewing everything, really. You know, make sure that you're on the best tracks, and you're maximising your potential. As I'm sure you know, like, you know, base rate, the interest rates are 0.01%. So, you know, another area to think about is if you do have disposable income, you know, it's looking at how you could diversify that money, really, and make sure that you're adding the most potential as possible. And, you know, in things like investing or in private pensions, you know, those sorts of areas, just to make sure that you're mitigating any risk, you know, moving forward, and diversifying as much as you possibly can, so that you're then taking advantage, you know, of what you can. But little example, we've helped the lady that I mentioned before. We've got a meeting with her in December, and that meeting will all be about 2021, you know, looking forward, really putting a solid plan in place for her business and for her growth, you know, at that point. So, you know, looking at taking on new members of staff, and how can that business look the most attractive, you know, to the market, and things like that. So it's always important to plan. I know I'm probably
no, it's not. It's absolutely key, and it's good to hear someone who is excited about it, because it can feel like, you know, it's the dull side. It's not what we want to do, but actually, planning for your business, it is really exciting. Planning for your career should be exciting. You know, planning to one day be able to retire and have that level of financial freedom. They're all really positive, exciting things. It's just sometimes they feel a little bit intangible when you're sitting there staring at a spreadsheet working out what to do next. So it's really good to make sure that, you know, we have that balance of the dull stuff that I need to do every day, and an eye on, you know, like, this is why I'm doing it. And I think if nothing else, 2020 has shown that, you know, we don't know what's around the corner, and having that safety net is incredibly useful. So I'm just going to bring us to a close there. So I think what I've kind of really taken away over and above everything is just how important it is to have conversations around finance, you know, whether that's with the people close to you, in your workplaces, with, you know, professional advisors, because that level of financial anxiety, it does have a real impact on our physical and mental well-being as well. So thank you so much for sharing those tips. I'm sure that will be incredibly useful to a lot of people who are watching. And hopefully, as we say, as we go into 2021, a lot of that planning will be around positivity and growth, and setting in some really good habits. So thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Salona. No, thanks for having me. Thank you.